The ego is the unobserved mind that runs your life. Eckhart Tolle. Welcome, everyone. I'm really excited to have you here today on this transformative journey of self-discovery and spiritual growth. Together, we will explore the very depths of the ego and discover how we can ultimately free ourselves from it. Now, I have long been fascinated by the ego, and if you don't know what that is, it's that complex psychological construct that we all have that shapes our thoughts and behaviors without us even being aware. This fascination with the ego began more than a decade ago when I first read Eckhart's The Power of Now. Now, I'm sure many of you have already read this book, but it awakened me to not only the beauty of the present moment, but also the silent yet destructive power of our ego. In this 7-part video series, we will do a deep dive into understanding what the ego truly is, how it manifests in our lives, and how we can ultimately transcend its influence to find true freedom. Along the way, we'll explore the concept of the true self, embrace the power of the present moment, and discover the profound impact of compassion on our awakening journey. So if you're curious about unlocking some of the mysteries of the ego, and above all, liberating your soul, then I encourage you to take the time to watch each of these 7 videos, starting with this first one that you're watching right now. Every one of these videos has incredible insight and wisdom to offer, but it's best to view them all in order to get the most out of them. Throughout this series, we'll explore some of the life-changing insights and practical tips that have guided me on my own spiritual journey. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into it. Now, before we can free ourselves from the ego, we have to first understand what it actually is. You see, at a high level, the ego is a psychological construct that develops as a result of our thoughts, experiences, mental conditioning, and of course, social influences. You've probably heard it go by a different name, like the conditioned mind, the false self, or even the illusionary self, because it creates an illusion of being our true identity when in reality, it is not. According to Eckhart, the ego is simply the unobserved mind that controls our life. In other words, it's the mind-made self, which, as we'll discover throughout the series, is not our real self. As we all know, our mind is responsible for everything, from our basic survival to how we live and operate in the world. But for something that is so essential to our very existence, how much time do we actually spend observing our mind? Just think about this for a second. We invest so much time focusing on what is outside of us, but we rarely devote the same time and attention to what is inside of us. This lack of self-awareness is exactly what Eckhart means when he calls the ego the unobserved mind. It just simply flies under our radar, often going unnoticed. However, if you paid attention, there is a second part to this quote that is perhaps even more important. The unobserved mind or ego not only goes unnoticed, it has significant control over our lives. It shapes our every thought and action, influences many of our beliefs, and quite simply determines the way we navigate through life. Now, this is not always a bad or negative thing, as much as it might seem. In fact, in certain situations, the ego actually serves an important purpose, such as fulfilling our basic needs or providing us a foundational sense of identity. For example, if we don't have any sort of identity in this world, then how can we simply get a driver's license? How can we apply for a job or buy a house? You can't just write nobody where it asks for your name. Although truth be told, nobody or no body is a better representation of who you really are than your given or chosen name. But you kind of get the picture here. Having an identity is not the most important thing in the world, but it definitely is important to some degree. It's not like you can just completely ignore it. These are the sorts of things where the ego is actually pretty helpful in helping us navigate the physical world, or the world of forms. However, the ego is not as helpful in the spiritual world, or the world of our true self, which is consciousness. We'll get into the true self a little bit more in part 2, but for now, let's focus on the times when the ego is not as helpful, the times when it can even be destructive. When we identify too much with the ego, it can actually lead to some serious problems. We may find ourselves struggling with limiting beliefs and thought patterns that negatively affect our thoughts, decisions, and even views about ourselves and the world around us. Just think about the time when you were a teenager and trying to develop a sense of identity, a sense of who you are in this constantly changing world. You often lost yourself in transitory things like the way you looked or how people thought of you, none of which is really you. During this critical stage of your life, you fell in love with this mental construct that we call I or me. You might have even said things like, I'm a Democrat, or he doesn't get me, and so on and so forth. And can you hear what's the underlying thought or statement behind every single one of these thoughts and statements? It's the focus on the personal self, the me, or the superficial I. As we'll explore in this video series, we are not the superficial I that is composed of thoughts and beliefs. Rather, we are a much deeper being, or I, if I can even use that word. This is an awareness that definitely takes time and effort to develop, and candidly, not many of us have this presence, especially during these early years of our life. By associating ourselves with words and concepts that distort who we actually are, we open the door for the ego to infiltrate our minds and effectively control not only our identity, but also our entire lives. We may not realize that we are under the ego's control, but we are definitely under the ego's control. Most of us lack the self-awareness needed to distinguish our true selves from these egoic constructs. And so we become vulnerable to the ego's endless mind games and destructive thought patterns. We experience great emotional and mental pain that takes a huge toll on us and appears in many forms in our life, like stress, anxiety, depression, insecurity, or even self-harm. One of the most common examples of how the ego can manipulate our minds is when we are hyper-focused on our own physical appearance. In fact, almost all of us, at one point or another, have been insecure about how we look physically, or how we think others view us. We might think we are too big or skinny, too dark or too light, too awkward or unattractive, whatever the external label may be. I myself was no different. I struggled with acne for so many years, and for a long time believed that it somehow impaired my own self-image. I became the ego's favorite victim because I just kept on believing and circulating these negative thoughts that somehow I didn't look good enough, or that I wasn't good enough because my skin just happened to be a bit more oily than others. And in the process, I lost a huge part of myself, my real self, all because I listened to my false self. I listened to all the ego's lies and delusions. In reality, though, there is no merit to these physical labels because we are not even the body to begin with. We are the essence, or the consciousness that lives inside the body. This is what people mean when they say they are the soul, the spirit, which we'll talk more about throughout the series. You see, the body, your own body, has changed countless times since the day you were born. But your essence has not. The soul or consciousness has not. However, as we grow older, the ego's influence becomes more and more pronounced, and we have become insecure about our body and our physical appearance. And the ego just loves feeding on this insecurity. It continues to play back these negative thought patterns in an endless loop, which has the power to destroy us from the inside out. In fact, sometimes you'll even see it where someone is called ugly or fat, and that word may last a second, but the ego can run with that emotional pain for an entire lifetime. And this is what we mean when we say we have scars or wounds. What we're really saying here is that the ego has cut us deep, and we're not even aware of it. It has grabbed a knife and carved out this hollow and empty version of ourselves. And because we can't actually see our true selves, these scars continue to impact our mental and emotional and spiritual well-being because we don't even know how to address them in the first place. We don't know how to become aware of the ego, and we don't know how to ultimately transcend the ego in the first place. But luckily, that's all about to change with the videos in this series. And so I really hope that by hearing all of these examples, you gain an appreciation of why it's so important for us to understand the ego and how exactly it manifests in every single one of our lives. This is important not only on a personal level, so that we can grow and build self-esteem, but it's even more important on the spiritual level. As long as we identify with the ego, we can never develop and awaken spiritually. And vice versa, the ego can only be truly understood and transcended on the spiritual path. We can't use the mind to fight the mind. We have to use the soul to transcend the mind. In other words, we have to cultivate a deep level of awareness of our true self so that we can begin to break free from the ego's grip. And only by knowing who we really are can we know who we are not, and vice versa. And so, regardless of what spiritual path you are on, which teachings or gurus you follow, or even if you believe in spirituality or not, I encourage you to keep an open mind. Keep an open heart, and let the wisdom of these teachings gently seep through. I promise I'm not trying to make you think a certain way or to live a certain way. Instead, I want you to point the mirror toward yourself and discover how you want to live your own life. I imagine that if you even got this far to this video in the first place, you do not want the ego to control your thoughts or to run your life any longer. So let's keep on journeying and dive deeper into this ocean of consciousness to discover the secret of who you really are and how you can live a more peaceful, joyful, and fulfilling life. If the ego is the chaotic waves crashing on the surface, then your true self is the calm and deep ocean below the surface. In this next video, we will be diving below the surface to discover our true self. We will focus on noticing and connecting with this living consciousness inside us so that we can see the ego for what it truly is, a veil covering the truth and nothing more. So if you enjoyed this video and want to journey further, then make sure to hit that subscribe button and save this playlist so that you can access the entire series in one easy and convenient place. Don't forget also to please drop a like and share your thoughts. Share your own experiences with the ego, as well as what you're looking forward to the most in these upcoming videos. This is the part that I truly love the most. The more we can collaborate together, the more we can shed a bigger light on the darkness that is the ego. A darkness that has no choice but to eventually surrender to the light. So thank you all for taking some time out of your busy schedule to watch this first part. I know it's not easy to sit through a long video, but I definitely appreciate it. And above all, I look forward to seeing you soon for part 2 of this series.